All right, it looks like we are ready to get started. Thank you so much for joining us for the Mid-Atlantic Teaching Artists Virtual Retreat. My name is Portia Hardy, and I work at the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. The session will be recorded and later shared, so please turn off your video if you do not want to be recorded. Today's workshop is called Healing Minds, Moving Bodies, Measuring the Mental Health Effects of Online Dance Classes During COVID-19 Pandemic, and will be led by Rachel Rugh and Dr. Julia Basso of New River Moving Arts located in Virginia. I'll now turn over things to our producer for a brief review of some technical housekeeping items. Susan?
Thanks, Portia. So I'm just going to go through a few slides here on the Zoom controls. So on the next slide, can we go one up? I think we jumped. There we go. If you would like to see the sign language interpreter video and want to pin it, you can scroll to interpreter Laura and point at your cursor at the top right of her webcam. You'll get a drop down. You'll see 3 little dots for a drop down, and then you can click on pin video. Or if you prefer gallery view, you can go to the top right there and click on gallery view to see all videos. And you can click again if you want to see the active speaker view. So only the active speakers video would be up. If we could go to the next slide. If you do get bumped out, easiest thing to do is just to try using that same link to come back in. We are recording this, as Portia said, so if you do miss something, don't worry. And if you need assistance, you can always give me a call. There's my cell number. I will be chatting that out as well, and you may want to jot it down in case you get bumped out, can't get back in. Now I want to just show you a few things on your controls. So if you point and hover your cursor at the bottom of your screen, your control should pop out. On the far right, you should see where it says chat. You can click on that, pop it out, and you've already been saying hello. So I know many of you have found it, but just if you're just finding it now, please just type in hello so I know that you found it. And to the left of that, there they come, hello, hello. And to the left of that, you'll see participants. If you pop out participants or click on it, it will pop out. And you'll see the participant list. And on the next slide, I want to show you how to do something. You can point and hover your cursor over your name, click on more, choose rename if you'd like to rename yourself, or if you would like to add your pronouns, you can go ahead and try that now. While we're in the participant panel, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. There'll be an image on the next slide. It is some of the nonverbal feedback tools at the bottom. They'll look a little bit different, but there should be a blue hand. So if you can click on your blue hand there, you should rate fabulous. I see the hands going up. I'm sure you guys are used to this by now, but any of those who are new to it, I just want to make sure you got this. So thanks everybody. That's it for me. I'm going to hand it back over to Portia.
Thank you, Susan. We are thrilled to begin this session led by 2 outstanding leaders in their respective fields. Rachel Rugh, founder of New River Moving Arts, is a dancer, teacher, mover, and shaker currently based in Blacksburg, Virginia. And Dr. Julia Basso is a neuroscientist, dancer, and yoga instructor, and serves as a senior research associate in the Department of Human Nutrition, Foods, and Exercise Center for Transformative Research on Health Behaviors at Fralin Biomedical Research Institute at Virginia Tech. We encourage you to check out their bios on the retreat's website. Please welcome Rachel and Julia, and let's begin.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to have you with us. And I'm going to be going into a little bit more about the history and background of New River Moving Arts, how Julia and I found each other, and kind of more on our journey together. But before we do that, I just thought that we could do a quick centering and grounding movement activity. And so you'll see the photos on the first slide. A lot of the teaching philosophy that I utilize in New River Moving Arts is directly influenced by Anne Green Gilbert, pioneer dance educator who directs the Creative Dance Center out in Seattle, Washington, which is where I was based for several years. And so I got to take some workshops at that location and learned a lot about her approach to brain compatible creative dance education. And so one of the things that really is the foundation for training at the Creative Dance Center, and something that I've tried to incorporate with New River Moving Arts in all of our programming and educational philosophy, is the idea of using the brain dance as a foundational tool to warm up the brain and body when we get started with our dancing practice together. And so we won't have any music or anything like that for this, but basically the brain dance is a series of movement patterns that are based on the developmental movements that humans go through in the first 3 years of life. So things when you see little babies reaching out away from their bodies and then pulling in for safety, those foundational patterns that we all actually have quite a bit of familiarity with, no matter our movement background. So if you'd like to join me in this, you're certainly welcome. You can have your screen on or off. I promise it will be very simple, but if you'd like to make sure there's a little bit of space around you, we can stay seated in our chairs and kind of participate on whatever level feels good for you. But this, as with so many somatic practices, we're going to start with breathing. And so if you'd like to just come to a comfortable seat, and if you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to, but just take a few deep breaths. Inhaling and exhaling. Feeling yourself ground into whatever surface you're sitting on. Inhaling and softly exhaling. Good. The next pattern in the brain dance warm-up is we're actually going to have some tactile stimulation. So I'm going to rub my hands together, waking up the surface of the skin. Beautiful. Generating a little bit of heat like I'm starting a fire. From here, I'm going to pull those hands apart. Feel that buzz of energy. And then just softly kind of wash it all over myself as though I'm kind of sloughing off any stress. You know, one of the things we're really missing these days is tactile connection with other humans, right? So kind of giving yourself permission to give yourself that healing touch. So a little tactile wake up. Good. From here, we'll move into the core distal pattern. So we're gonna hug everything in to the core of the body, bring your knees close, bring your arms close, and then reach away like you're blossoming like a starfish. Beautiful, everyone. And then reach everything into the core, and then radiate away to those distal ends. Let's do that one more time. Feel that nice stretch through the center of the body, and reach away. So joyful, lovely. From here, our next pattern is head to tail. And you can see in the photo, Julia's doing a nice cat and cow, the yoga stretch. But if you're seated in a chair, you can curl your spine forward, looking down towards your feet. And then arch your spine, looking up towards the ceiling. And let's do that a couple more times. Curling and arching, so nice. And then a little wiggle side to side, lateral flexion of the spine, kind of shift in your seat. Lovely. Moving into the upper and lower connectivity pattern, let's all just reach over our heads like you're climbing a ladder. And beautiful. Isolating that upper body. Good. And then you can take your wrists and roll them around. Good. And then shake the hands off. Down into the lap. And then for your feet, you can't really see my feet. I'm going to scooch so you can see. There's my toesies. So I'm just going to take one foot out and roll it around. You can see the bottoms of my dirty feet. I'm a dancer. They're always dirty. And then the other foot around. Good. Another way. And then from here, just run your feet and run them one way and run them the other way. Very nice. Someone says they can only see the slide. I want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. I think if you want to double click on my picture, then my picture will pop up. So for the next pattern, We're going to isolate one half of the body and then the other. So what I'm going to do in my chair is as though I'm opening and closing like a book. I'm going to open and as if I was transferring an object from one hand to the other, and close and open and close. Beautiful, lovely, and close, open and close. So I'm moving one half of the body and then the other. Very nice. Sort of cementing that pattern through the body. And then finally, we're going to move diagonally or in a cross-lateral pattern. So this is really important for connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. We're going to move cross-laterally. So take one hand and touch your opposite knee. Take the other hand, touch your opposite knee. Good. Sometimes called the cross crawl. Yeah. And when I do this with kids, they really like to see how fast they can go. Good, very nice. Just connecting those two halves of the brain. Lovely. And then last in our brain dance, a lot of times what I'll do is we'll talk about the vestibular engagement of the vestibular system. So the idea of getting really dizzy. And then again, if I was working with children, we would spin in circles until we fall down, right? To get that nice vestibular stimulation. But for our purposes here, let's just roll our head around. Feel a little swing as you look down, and then swing the other way. Let your eyes just track the direction that you're going. Maybe get a little dizzy. Good, and then roll up nice and slow. And that will be the end of our brain dance warm up together. And this is something that I really encourage you to do, this series of patterns. You can do a very short version of it. Anytime you have to, for instance, give a presentation or take a test, or if you're just feeling a little bit jittery and need to ground, it's a wonderful way to calm the nervous system and kind of come back into your body, which we all certainly need. Oh, I'm so glad that felt good. I saw that in the chat. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about New River Moving Arts and how we came to be. So I have been in the Blacksburg, Virginia area, which is in the New River Valley of Virginia, since 2013. And before that, I was dancing and teaching out in Seattle, Washington. And before that, I attended UNC Greensboro for my undergraduate degree. So since I've been in Blacksburg, I've been teaching modern dance and creative dance to all ages. In 2017, I had a brief time in Milwaukee getting my Master of Fine Arts in dance. And when I returned to the New River Valley, I really wanted to provide a home for holistic, inclusive, body positive dance training in this area, which it was really lacking. So I started teaching again, sort of just as myself, but then have branched out to bring in other instructors. And in 2020, we opened the doors, in February 2020, we opened the doors of our new studio space. And in March 2020, we closed those doors indefinitely, unfortunately. So you can see behind me, this is one of the rooms in our studio space that I'm in right now. There's another photo up there of the larger studio. It's quite beautiful. It feels very sad to not have lots of people in here right now. But we have been adapting through, we've been teaching online classes to adults and some to children as well, although we've been giving them a break from that because they've had so much online Zoom learning lately. But so we've been doing online offerings since March. We've had outdoor socially distanced summer camps for children and teenagers, and those went beautifully this summer. And we're also going to be starting to do some small group and private lessons in the studio masked up. So we're trying to, kind of continuing to adapt to this changing climate. And if you want to go to the next slide, let's see. I think that was all I wanted to say about that, Julia. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry, Julia. I was just going to mention that that Dr. Julia Basso is. I met Julia through being a participant in moving arts classes. And so she came to the studio as a student, but also as a wonderful dancer in her own right. And so she has started teaching workshops with us. And so as we connected, we discovered a lot of the things in common that we're going to be talking about more.
Right. Okay, great. So yeah, so as Rachel mentioned, you know, I actually had come to know Rachel a little bit online as I was realizing I was coming down to this Virginia area. And so I wanted to see what kind of dance things were happening there, because you know, we don't have a dance department at Virginia Tech. And so I kind of saw Rachel Rugh and the interesting things that were happening in the area because of her offerings. And so my background is in neuroscience and dance. I went to Middlebury College where I did my bachelor's of arts. I double majored in neuroscience and dance. I'd always been dancing my entire life, but also very, very interested in science. And so I double majored there and then headed over to Rutgers University, which I was telling Portia before that I'm from New Jersey. I'm from the New Jersey area near Philadelphia. So went back and did my Ph.D. in behavioral and neuroscience at Rutgers. And there I started to study the effects of exercise on the brain. And you know, started to combine my interests a little bit there, and then did my postdoctoral work after my PhD at New York University, where I joined Dr. Wendy Suzuki's laboratory to study the effects of exercise on cognitive functioning and brain physiology in humans. And so I was very excited to do that. And after that position, I got this position as a senior research associate in the Department of Human Nutrition, Foods, and Exercise at Virginia Tech. So that's where I am now. I am working in the laboratory of Dr. Warren Bickel. So I am working at the Center for Transformative Research on Health Behaviors. So I'm very interested in how we can engage in health behaviors to optimize brain health and brain functioning. And yeah, so this is kind of my first real venture, the project that we're going to be talking about today, to the real integration between neuroscience and dance. And so I'm very excited to share the results with you today.
So it's been so nice to connect with Julia, both as friends and as colleagues. I wanted to talk a little bit about how our experiences and our interests overlap. In my creative work and in my teaching nowadays, I'm really interested in alternative ways of collaborating with artists, especially in kind of the long distance and in virtual processes. So I'm part of a company called Mountain Empire Performance Collective, and we do a lot of work with long distance dance collaboration. And so it's funny because we started working together in 2014, and we're using a lot of the same processes that we are all now forced to be using through virtual rehearsals in different video chat formats, through emailing each other dance instructions and scores, sending dances through the mail was one project we worked on. And so I've been really interested in how we stay connected as artists, even when we are far apart. And so this has been kind of a natural continuation of some of those interests. And I'm also really interested in best practices for dance teaching and ways to help movers of all ages feel connected and integrated in their bodies, no matter what learning style resonates the most with them. And so when we really had to make this shift to online learning processes, I've been thinking a lot about how can I reach my students most effectively, and how can I help them in this sort of brave new world of online learning with dance, which is such a physical, such an embodied practice, and something that we really associate with being in person in the studio, a community activity. And then of course, Julia's research interests, which she'll talk more about, really have to do with what's happening in the brain when we're dancing. And so she came to me and said, why don't we start trying to figure out if there's a way that we can measure the mental health effects and the wellness outcomes of the online courses that we're already providing through Neuromoving Arts. And that is sort of how this study was born.
Right, so we're going to go into the science of all of this a little bit. So as I'm kind of developing my science career, and in hopes that I'll be starting the what I'll be naming the Embodied Brain Lab next summer at Virginia Tech, the goal of the lab will be to understand the body-brain connection. So I'm really fascinated by how we can use our physical bodies to change our brains. This kind of research started around the 1960s, and it's been slowly emerging. And so it's really exciting to see, because there has been throughout science, throughout the history of science, this real disconnect between the body and brain, that these are separate entities. But of course, as we know, as movers and shakers ourselves, that there's kind of an intimate physical connection between these two things, that as we move, as we become more flexible and stronger and just kind of feel embodied, then we notice shifts in our mental state. That I know that's true from a personal perspective, and now that's what the goal of the lab in this research is, to kind of understand that body-brain connection and to kind of understand the underlying mechanisms, what's happening in the body to promote changes in the brain, and vice versa. So here to kind of, there's a lot of information on this slide, and just to kind of touch on some of the information here, there has been, as I said, this history of studying how physical activity impacts the brain. And so one of the things that keeps coming up time and time again is this idea, and this idea came about in the 1960s. We used to think that the brain, and here's a picture of the brain from all different angles, the human brain, so we can see all kind of cortical areas, the top, from underneath, from the side. Here's the cerebellum in the back, and the brainstem coming down. We see some of the nerves kind of coming in here. And so it was this idea that the brain was static. It wasn't changeable. Once we got to adulthood, that was it. But around this time, we discovered that the brain is actually quite plastic. And one of the best ways to change the brain is actually through physical activity. So the idea that the brain is plastic means that new neurons, and neurons are the cells of the brain, can actually create and come anew and integrate into all those neural circuits. And one of the best ways to increase the rate of what is called neurogenesis, you see this first word here, the new neurons, is to engage in physical activity. So I just love that, and I'm fascinated by that. And all these other things that are happening here are just to show you, not only there's new neurons, but there's increases in neurotransmitters, right? The neurochemicals of our brain. The new neurons that are formed are actually more complex. Their dendrites are longer and more intricate. So meaning that the connections that they can make to other neurons are more complicated. That it's a more enriched brain that you have when you engage in physical activity. So this is kind of the basis for everything that I think about and study. And when we think about dance, so a lot of the studies on that previous slide, you're talking about wheel running in the rodent, and that is what I studied for my Ph.D. You get a rat or a mouse to run on a wheel, and they'll do it vigorously, they'll do it strenuously, and that's how we know all the information. But when it comes to humans, we have so many more things that we can do with our bodies, right? And dance is a really neat one, because it's a physical activity that's so multimodal. So Rachel and I, we just recently wrote a paper that's in review right now on the neuroscience of dance. We call From Culture to Clinic, so we talk about a whole range of things. But this is something we created. We really thought very deeply about all the different elements, how dance affects human behavior, function, physiology. And so the neat thing about dance, and this is kind of in comparison to something, say if I just went for a run, or just rode my bicycle, right? So there's all kinds of sensory components to it. We just engaged in a tactile experience, right? So there's a lot of these proprioceptive things that we do, grounding into the floor, feeling our bodies, really getting in touch with all aspects of our bodies from head to toe. There's motor components, right? So of course we're moving through space, not only big gross motor movements, but fine tune. There's a lot of gestural kind of movements if I'm dancing, right? So from fine tune to big gross motor movements. The cognitive piece comes in when we're doing our choreography, right? We're watching the teacher, the choreographer. We're trying to copy movements. We're trying to learn and remember information. There's a social element to it in that normally, right, we're in class, we're with a teacher, we're interacting with others. There's a lot of touch, partnering work. The emotional piece, we know as artists that when we engage in dance on stage or just a personal practice, right, there's a lot of emotionality that comes into the movement, for me, different than when I go running. There's rhythmic components to it in that you have to keep to the beat, to a tune, maybe going with that, right, keeping a beat, or going against it. There's different ways you can interplay with musical rhythm. And then finally, creativity, in that dance is a really cool thing in that you're creating movement anew. This could be movement that's never been done or experienced before, and I think that's so cool. So altogether, that means that dance is a really multimodal physical activity practice. And then when we look at the brain that's here, there's different brain regions. When we think about the behavioral neuroscience, or how the brain supports all these particular behaviors, it's not just one region. It's a whole different brain regions, including cortical areas, including subcortical areas, like, for example, the hippocampus, which is the brain region that's involved in learning and memory. And so that's more kind of down subcortical areas here. And, you know, because it is so multimodal, engaging so many of these brain systems, we hypothesize that it's going to be helpful for a whole range of behaviors, not only in healthy individuals, but people with mental health disorders, with movement disorders, and with memory disorders. So that's kind of where this work is starting. So that brings us to kind of this idea of our current the current COVID crisis. And before we dig into kind of all the data that we have from this study, I wanted to pose to the group here, and if you feel comfortable, you can kind of put this in the chat, and maybe some of our hosts can help us kind of, you know, talk about what people say. But how has COVID-19 affected you and your mental health? Would anybody like to share any thoughts on that?
And as a reminder, you can use your chat function for dropping that into, for bringing it up to the front.
Yeah, and I can see that as well too, so. Okay, so, right. Right, so we can even just start there. Yeah, so I'm seeing things like depression, anxiety, there's social isolation, kind of having limited things in terms of food items. And yeah, I mean, as you can see from looking at all these words here, right? A lot of mental health issues stem from being socially isolated. And so we're in this situation right now where we have to kind of be at home, right? Be socially isolated. And so it's not surprising that so many of us are feeling anxious, feeling depressed, feeling just uncomfortable, right, in ourselves. And our mood is changing, it's shifting. And so what I really think is interesting, I pulled this directly from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I just wanted to read it to you. So the CDC says that pandemics can be stressful. The coronavirus disease pandemic may be stressful for people, and I know some people said stress, right? Fear and anxiety about a new disease and what could happen can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and children. Public health actions such as social distancing can make people feel isolated and lonely and can increase stress and anxiety. However, these actions are necessary to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Coping with stress in a healthy way will make you, the people you care about, and your community stronger. So I love that, that they say, okay, you may feel stressed, you may feel depressed, you may feel anxious, but you need to socially isolate, and these things are kind of like a necessary thing that might emerge out of this, right? But that coping with stress in a healthy way will make you and your community stronger. So this was kind of where we were starting with, like, this idea that we know we are isolated, we can't get together in the classroom, and what do we do? So Rachel and I put our heads together. We already had these ongoing classes that were happening throughout the week. It was really kind of a dynamic offering of things at the studio, and we had a community of people. And then everything all of a sudden was, you know, February, March happened, and we were all just isolating in our homes. And I also, as a researcher doing human subjects research, needed to figure out, like, okay, what do I do now? I can't bring in people to the lab. I can't go to the lab. I don't know, what can we do? So I had already been doing a lot of these online studies through crowdsourcing platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a really cool platform. But, you know, we wanted to see what we could do to bring all of our dance offerings online. So we did just that. You know, Rachel and I, as academics, I'm literally on Zoom all day long. We said, okay, well, let's get ourselves together and try to host these classes online. And so that's what we did, and we built out this study design. So this is kind of a typical pre-post testing design. I designed a whole variety of standardized kind of self-reported measures that we administered to our participants before the class, and they could take this you know, within a week of taking their class. And we reached out to them and we said, you know, feel free to choose one of our offerings. We're offering ballet, jazz, and contemporary in the studio. So they chose, and they registered for their class. They took it online with us, and then post-test, you know, post-class, they took the kind of a similar series of questionnaires. And our hypothesis was that, you know, we really wanted to test whether online dance could improve both mental health and social connectivity, even though you were kind of alone in your room doing your thing. But the fact that it was dance, that we were connecting, we thought that, you know, maybe we could increase that social connectedness. So just to reiterate, our major, you know, outcomes of interest were these mental health effects, and then the social connectivity effects, and did they relate to one another at all?
So when it came time to implement the project, of course, the first step was recruitment, getting participants for our study. And we had a wonderful research assistant, graduate assistant named Ashley Humphreys, and she is actually going to be turning this into her master's thesis research. And so she did a lot of the outreach for us through a variety of online avenues. And so we reached out to some dance specific communities, and also people who had no experience with dancing. So we reached out to the Virginia Tech community through email avenues, and then also Ashley advertised on Craigslist. There is a site called Dancing Alone Together that has emerged as a response to the experience of dancers being in isolation. It's really become the clearinghouse for online dance classes, performances, etc. So we put an ad on Dancing Alone Together as well. And then several different Facebook groups we advertised in, including, for instance, the Michi, or Movement Intensive in Compositional Improvisation Facebook site, as well as our personal social networks via email and Facebook, Instagram. So through that, we had been hoping to get at least 30 participants, and we ended up getting 47, which Julia is going to talk a little bit more about the results in the moment. But that was a wonderful, over 4 weeks, we had a nice number of people respond from all over the country. Yes, and the classes were free. They were free of charge. That was one of the things that we had as a perk. to our participants. So if you participated in the study, you get one class at no cost to you. And as Julia was saying, the participants got to choose whether they wanted to do modern, ballet, or jazz. So we created an online sign-up, simple online sign-up software, and we had our flyers that we sent out to people that directed people to that online sign-up software, and we used Sign Up Genius, which was a free online sign-up software. And then after people signed up for whatever class they preferred, then a representative from the Embodied Brain Lab would reach out to those participants via email and give them more information on the structure of the study, how they needed to take their survey before the class, and then take the class, and then of course the survey upon wrapping up the class. And then on behalf of New River Moving Arts, I would email out Zoom links and information about the class to participants in each distinct class 24 hours in advance. So the structure of the classes was 60 minutes in duration. And of course, we would take about 5 minutes at the beginning and 5 minutes at the end for housekeeping and wrap up. So it ended up being about 50 minutes of physical instruction. And we wanted to keep it at a beginner level of instruction so that it felt really accessible to a variety of participants, because we had so many people from different movement backgrounds. We wanted it to feel achievable to many different individuals. So they had either that modern, ballet, or jazz experience.
So I first just wanted to tell you a little bit about who our population was, who participated. So I was so excited to, in only 4 weeks' time, we had 47 people complete the study, which was just, in my book, fantastic. A really, really quick turnaround, and I don't know, with a good recruitment through Virginia Tech and through some of these other resources that we utilized. So we had, here's kind of our graph of age. So we had a range of ages. Of course, you had to be at least 18 to participate, an adult, so 18 and up, with our average being around 32 years of age. But we had young adults, middle-aged, and older adults participate. So that was wonderful. And in terms of their dance experience, most of our participants were beginner or intermediate, but we did have some advanced and professional dancers as well. And so as Rachel was saying, we did offer the class at a beginner level, but I do have to say, like, a lot of if we were offering, a battement series or whatever it might be, that we did have different levels. You could kick higher, depending. So we did offer like a range of things that people could do. And then in terms of the location, I didn't know if we were only going to be able to recruit directly from the New River area. But in fact, we were able to gather people from all over the United States. And so we had a split of about 50% of rural versus urban areas. So we had people from New York City, we had people from Colorado, from out in Seattle, all over. So that was really exciting as well. And one of the questions I asked them, just at their post-test experience, so on a scale from 1 to 10, how difficult did you find the class? So we had people saying, from the larger the number, the greater the difficulty, so from 1 to 7. So people did, have, again, a range of experiences there. And then in terms of enjoyment, on a scale from 1 to 10, how enjoyable did you find the class? So a lot of people found the class quite enjoyable. So we were happy to see that. And that's, I didn't look at the data yet, but that's certainly something we could look at, the relationship between enjoyment and some of these outcomes. So one of the first pieces of data here that I'm going to show is the mental health effects. And as I said, coming from this kind of brain-based perspective, I looked at a whole range of different mental health outcomes. And on the y-axis here, what you're looking at is change score. So that's the difference between post, minus pre. So how much did they change from before to after the class? So what we see, and these stars indicate statistical significance in the statistical tests I ran. So we see that individuals showed significant decreases in negative affect. They showed significant decreases in depression. Then they showed significant increases in self-esteem and significant increases in positive affect. So this is like ideally something that you would want to see. Not only did they decrease in all their negative symptomatology, but they increased in some of these good feelings that we have. So that was really, really exciting. Okay. And then in terms of the social effects, how social, right, connected did they feel? We see, and again, you're looking at the change score here, so that the individuals that took the class felt more connected to their community and felt more socially connected to one another. So that was really, really exciting. So our effects turned up both in mental health and the social connectivity. We brought them out of that social isolation a little bit. And then finally I said, well, okay, do these things connect at all? And what we saw was that the bigger effect, the bigger effect that you found in self-esteem, then the more socially connected you are feeling. So these two things are related. And the same thing with negative affect. So the more you decreased in your negative affect, then the more socially connected you are feeling. So that was just so exciting to me that our intervention of only one 60-minute dance class made you feel better, your mental health improved in a variety of ways, and you felt more socially connected. And so I love that I made this figure because for me, I had always been very interested in the body-mind, body-brain connection, that we move our bodies, we know we feel better in a whole variety of ways after, just from personal experience, I know this, right? But the new thing for me is that, this community piece comes on board, and that the body and mind within oneself feels better, but then all of a sudden there's this connection to others. So I was just really so excited about these findings, and I think they have so many implications for some future work that we can do, and I'll be talking about that a little later. So those were our results, and now Rachel's going to share some more of kind of the practical details of what we found from the community perspective.
Absolutely. So I wanted to choose pull out some of the participant feedback that we received. And I tried to put kind of a representation of, not to be completely Pollyanna about this, a few people did have difficulties with the Zoom format, right? And so one person, you'll see, notes that as much as they loved that these classes were happening, they found Zoom really difficult, and they really missed that increased social component of being in person, where you get to chat with people before, during, and after class. So they don't feel as social on Zoom. However, we still get some of that social aspect kind of replaced, even if we know that it is not, it's certainly not in that ideal world where we would be all together. Another person expected to do more choreography in class than just the movement exercises. And so this is something we could certainly look at in the future, maybe offering more advanced options for those movers that want a little bit of a bigger challenge, although the majority of the movers seem to feel that it was a challenging enough experience that they got something out of it. But just wanted to share that, that we had some positive and some negative feedback, but primarily positive. So you'll see, for instance, one person said that they had been aching for a way to start moving their body since the pandemic hit. We're very grateful for the opportunity. Another person mentioned that they had been diagnosed with depression and had good and bad days, and that dance tends to be a positive impact in their life, and they were having a bad day until they took the class, and then their day improved significantly after the class. And then finally, I wanted to note that one person mentioned that they felt nervous about turning on their camera. And I'll talk about that in a moment in kind of the best practices section, but they decided to do it anyway and ended up having a good time. So, and if you want to go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about sort of things that I have learned, things that we have learned collectively about best teaching practices in this online format. So I know that many of you are actively teaching in various online capacities with your art forms. And so a lot of this may feel familiar to you, but one of the things that I found, kind of the obvious, is to troubleshoot those sound issues. I've got my headset here, and found, as a teacher of a dance modality, one thing that was really helpful in Zoom was to use the screen sharing function to share sound on my computer. So what I would do, what I have been doing for my online classes, people have different strategies for this, but what worked well for me was to play music directly on my computer and share the sound through the share screen function on Zoom. And that way people could hear both my voice and the music at the same time. Because before, we had tried several different things before starting this study. It was nice that we had a few months of online class to kind of get through some of these hiccups. So it felt quite smooth once we got to the study. You know, I mentioned here using the spatial framework to your advantage, right? Let's not pretend that we're all in a large dance studio. Knowing that people are in their living rooms or their bedrooms and their children might literally be climbing on them while they're in class. I'll call out Julia because I've seen that happen before, of course, in her household. And so, you know, kind of taking that spatial framework and kind of encouraging people to be okay with wherever you are using that environment as inspiration. And so a lot of times, for instance, I might encourage dancers to do a brief improvisational exercise where they look around their space and they take inspiration from their space. And maybe they see, for instance, I'm in the dance studio, there's lines behind me, and I might create a little improvised dance out of those straight lines behind me. Or maybe you have kind of a curving couch in your living room, something like that, and you can take the inspiration from the curved lines in your environment. And so that's just an example of ways that we don't have to pretend that everyone has a gigantic studio space to move in, and meeting them where they are with the space that they have is helpful. That also means using movements that can be done in, for instance, about a 6 by 6 foot square. So as a teacher, we really have to kind of redefine our classes, knowing that, for instance, in a traditional dance class, we would do across the floor activities where you're moving and traveling across the space. That may not be possible. And so finding ways to help people get, you know, that kind of aerobic fix without having a huge amount of space to run, leap in. Yeah, so we did a lot of kind of exploring how to use that the best that we could. So one of the things that has been a good lesson for me is to slow down and clarify my methods. And I think just in general in this online format, because there are so many different types of learners, learning on a screen is obviously different than learning from in person, when I can come and put my hands on a body and say, oh, here's the alignment that we're trying to achieve. And so when I really have to do verbal cueing, I have to slow down and be very simple and clear in my directions. One of the things I try to do in my online classes is I try not to do too many things where I'm facing away from the screen. Because if the dancers are trying to imitate what I'm doing and they're having to like look over their shoulder while they're trying to practice the movement, it can get frustrating. And I've found as a participant in other online classes, that's been the case for me. If I'm having to focus too much on the screen and trying to sort of sense the space behind me, it can get demoralizing. Yeah. So slowing down and simplifying just in general is things that, you know, we don't have to go hugely virtuosic. We can go back to basics, and that can still be really satisfying. You know, as Julia has talked about, there's so many feelings coming up, and as many of you shared in the chat, you know, we really want to create space for emotional processing. And as one of our participants mentioned, they really miss that social, emotional aspect of being in class in person. And so I try at the beginning and end of class to just do a little check-in. How you guys doing? Anybody want to share what's been happening in your week, right? And then in addition, doing some kind of somatic sensing check-in, kind of like we did at the beginning of class, where we really tune in to where we are in our bodies, because in this time when we're all online a lot, it can be very disembodying. And so having some time to just breathe and sit together before we jump into moving in a more full-bodied way. Something that was suggested to us and that we kind of took into consideration that one of our students mentioned was that alternating between speaker and gallery view was helpful, in the sense that of course, when we're in Zoom and there's, you can see all the little boxes of people. It's like a little gallery, right? And that can be really nice and joyful when we're moving together as a class, so that it feels as that we get a little bit of that community aspect. But then remembering as the instructor to put it back in speaker view when you're teaching material can be really helpful, because then you're not one tiny little box and the dancers aren't having to look at a very small picture of you to pick up that movement material. So that's just something that we try to remind people, that in this portion of class, you'll be learning material. You can have me really big on your screen. And then in this later portion of class, you can put it into gallery view and we can have that experience of moving and dancing together. And one thing that I tried to do, I've been, actually this was suggested to me in one of the many webinars that I have attended on online dance practices, and I can't remember which one right now, but the idea of allowing the students to witness each other. And so one thing that I like to do at the end of class, and this is something that the participant mentioned, that they got up the courage to turn their camera on right at the end of class, because I'll do allow the dancers to witness each other. So we'll learn a phrase, a short movement phrase, and then I would divide the class in half and maybe have half of them dance together as a group, and then the other half dance together as a group, which again, in a traditional dance class, often you'll have group A go, group B go, and you get to enjoy watching each other, clapping, giving energy to the dancers that are moving, that kind of, you know, boost of endorphins that comes from that community movement. And so again, not exactly the same, but gives a little bit of an approximation of that experience. And several people have mentioned that they really enjoyed that. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that it's okay for Zoom classes to be a little bit shorter than in-person classes. Again, we ended up moving for about 50 minutes in these offerings, and generally my in-person classes tend to be an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes, and sometimes more than that, especially if we're doing improvisation or somatic practices. But we are learning now kind of in real time the effects of Zoom fatigue, and so not to pretend that we have the bandwidth for a really long offering, knowing that these, we've sort of just found through trial and error that it seems like that sort of 45 minutes to an hour is about perfect, and it's about how much people can handle before the, you know, eyes start glazing over in that Zoom fatigue. So that's kind of a little you know, snapshot of some of the things that we've been thinking about and that we've learned from this process.
Great. And finally, I know we're kind of coming to time and I want time for some questions. But in terms of future directions, this work really lends itself because of the exciting, significant results we got with both mental health and the social connectivity piece, moving this into different communities with mental health disorders, people with depression, anxiety, PTSD. We know from some of the new literature that's coming out that these individuals with pre-existing disorders, substance use disorders as well, are struggling the most from this social isolation and having really significant effects. So to kind of start bringing this practice to some of those communities, as well as children with autism as a social disorder. So this might be really a neat, accessible thing for somebody with autism who has difficulty socially interacting with others. So we're excited to possibly do that, and Virginia Tech has some autism programs, so we're hoping to link up. And then finally, you know, getting into some of the underlying brain mechanisms using some of these brain imaging techniques that I've worked with in the past, like electroencephalography, these are big words, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, but to simply say that you can look at the brain activity. So if there's a shift in behavior, you know that something's happening in the brain, and you can measure that through new technologies that we have. So yes, we thank you so much for listening and your attention and just joining us today. And we're happy to you know, answer any questions you might have, either about the neuroscience, science findings, and or the implementation of the dance. So I guess you know, put those in the chat, and then we will just go ahead and answer anything you have on your mind.
So Julie,
I'm noticing, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Portia.
Oh, I was going to highlight some of the questions. Did you want to do that, Susan?
Nope, that's fine.
Alrighty. And so thank you so much, Julia and Rachel. There have been a few questions that popped up specifically about the comment regarding sharing your sound on via Zoom and whether or not that will interrupt any viewing opportunities, or will you be able to test any levels by doing that?
Yeah, and I could speak to that a little, just with the disclaimer that I am learning this as I go as well. So I see somebody mentioned about, yeah, having participants in speaker versus gallery view. Okay, let's see. So if you share sound on your screen while teaching, that does not have to share the screen. So if you go to the share screen function, there is a little there's a little checkbox that says sound only. And so if you share sound only, then it just shares the sound from your screen, but it does not share the picture. So then you can continue to have the students watch you in speaker view, and you can look at them in gallery view to see the entire group. I hope that helps. Let me see, were there any other, if you play sound on a computer and have the headset on. So for me, this is a Bluetooth headset, and there's on Zoom, you can check the levels if you go to the microphone button, and there's a little up arrow and it says test speaker and microphone. You have to select the microphone. So once you've synced your Bluetooth to your computer, you choose that Bluetooth for microphone and for speaker, and then you can do a little test speaker and microphone, and that should help you to test those levels. Yeah.
And just lifting up one more question, because we do have to wrap up to start another session. We will continue, or can continue, this conversation via our Facebook page, which we will talk about in the closing. But there is a question asking whether or not you're planning to expand the study to a bigger group of participants over more sessions.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm kind of trying to figure out where I can write a grant, definitely to the NIH, using this data to propose some kind of long-term studies, because the fact that we see such a significant effect with just one class indicates to me that something over the long term might even push these effects to be more significant. And so, yes, ideally, those are the next steps for us. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you again for attending today's sessions, everyone. Thank you to Julia and Rachel for this excellent information. Before we end, we'd love to take a minute to hear from you about how this workshop resonated with you all. Our producer will now post a quick poll. Recordings of this workshop and others will be available on NASA's YouTube page and within the week. Look to the chat to see our link to the Facebook page, which I am posting right now. And please join us there to offer your reflections on today's workshop. Also, Julia and Rachel, if you are available, we would love to have you over to answer any additional questions that might come up. Also, watch your email inbox for a brief survey every Friday of the retreat to let us know what you think. The 2020 Mid-Atlantic Teaching Artists Virtual Retreat is a co-sponsored project of the Mid-Atlantic State Arts Agencies in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. We are grateful for the generous support of all of these collaborators and grateful for your participation today. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you all.